Hello, Three Chord Rock fans. Welcome to Rat Tales, the podcast that brings you the music and stories of the Boston rock scene that grew out of the mid-1970s at the Rat and some of the other rock joints that sprung out of that scene, each with their own sick charm. We decided to kick off the series with JJ Rassler, originally with DMZ, one of the pioneering bands from that era. Here they are doing a blistering cover of Iggy and the Stooges' Search and Destroy.
I'm a street-walking cheetah with a handful of napalm. I'm the runaway son of a nuclear A-bomb. I in the world's old goddamn bud, the one who says head to their son. Hey!
Good afternoon, my name's Mike Hoban. Today we've got JJ Rassler, formerly of DMZ, Rounder Records, The Queers, Odds, Downbeat 5. You're still with Downbeat 5.
Still with 20th anniversary.
20th anniversary of Downbeat 5 coming up. But figured JJ's the perfect guy to talk to about kind of like the evolution of a lot of the Boston rock scene. You know, after the 60s were over, we started moving into the punk scene. So just got to talk to JJ and let him talk and tell us, what you came from Philly. I know that. And so what brought you up here? I remember reading one time that you were attracted to the folk scene, which I thought was kind of funny. So
yeah, that was part of the reason. Thanks for having me. I don't know if I'm the perfect person, but I'll do the best I can. I came up here from Philly in 1970. I was in bands in Philly all during the 60s. I was in a lot of bands, and I saw a lot of shows. Another guy in my band, his father worked for Capitol Records. He was a promo guy. And if you recall, the Beatles were on Capitol. And being a promo guy for the Beatles label got this guy tickets for anything. Wow. He was the man to know. So we got in to see shows, the Beach Boys, the Rolling Stones, any band that was coming through town we saw and stuff, and we were exposed to a lot of stuff. And he was the rhythm guitar player in my band, like I say. And
what was the name of that band?
That was the Deserters.
Oh yeah.
This was during the Vietnam era and stuff, and we're doing everything we could to desert that fact. And we were the Deserters, and we played a lot of garage music. And I was in a few bands after that. I did some big concerts at Fairmount Park, which was a huge thing. We played for 8,000 people my last show there in Philly.
How old were you?
I was 18.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was nerve-wracking, and I was new at it all, but I never played to an audience like that before. And Tracy Nelson and Mother Earth was on the bill. Opening up was Allen Ginsberg, and he was
the poet,
and he was chanting and doing all this stuff, and we're getting in the mood for the festival, shall we say, and this guy's rattling on and chanting and stuff, and it was a zoo, and it was a funny scene. But about a month after that, I moved up to Boston. In Philly, there was a magazine called Hit Parader, and they always used to say...
It was a national magazine, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a national zine. And they would just print the lyrics to songs. But in the front of the magazine, it had Bands Bubbling Under, it was called. And it had pictures of bands that some people never heard of, or others in the know did. And there were pictures of the Remains, Barry and the Remains from Boston, the Rock and Ramrods, Beacon Street Union. And that, I kept on seeing Boston in these. In folk music, there was Tom Rush, the Jim Kweskin Jug Band, and people that I was listening to at home and stuff. And I said, wow, Boston would be a good place to check out. I was working in a record store and suddenly had to leave the record store in Philly, and I came to Boston. And
Suddenly had to leave. I like the sound of that.
and
Details will remain
yeah,
on the
you know,
sly.
Yeah, film at 11. And I came up here, and it was like, it was like a paradise coming up here. I mean, I remember going to the airport, and I didn't have much money. I had a knapsack and all kinds of goodies in the back, and I had about $25, $30 in my pocket, and I asked people at the airline, where can I, go for $25? And they said, oh, you can go to Boston for $23. I said, I'm going to Boston. And I got off the plane, and I asked some girl, where do people who look like me hang out? And she said, if you help me with my baggage, I'll get you there. And I got off the subway at Harvard Square. And it was like the movies, it was like Wizard of Oz. The movie's black and white. I come up out of the subway, and the movie's in Technicolor. And there were all kinds of girls in next to nothing. There was guys with hair down to their butts, and people were imbibing in public, and I couldn't believe it.
What year was this?
70.
1970, okay.
Yeah, and I started hanging around the Cambridge Common, and made myself a little money, and met some people, and I met this girl, and she said, oh, yeah, you can come crash at my house. And she says, I spent a couple days, and she says, I have to go to New York. I guess she was a friend of Keith Moon, and they were playing at the Fillmore, and she said, keep an eye on the house and feed the cats, and everything's fine. This was in Central Square, and I hung around Central Square for the next several years, and it was awesome. And, got to see bands that were playing at the time. I remember right in 70 seeing Mata Hoople over at Harvard Stadium. They used to put on shows there.
That was my first show ever.
Really?
Mata Hoople, right around that time, like
Oh,
1972.
Well, I saw them in 70 in Harvard Stadium. Saw the band, Alvin Lee. I saw Janis Joplin, which turned out to be her very last performance, her public performance and stuff. And
At Harvard Stadium.
yeah, at Harvard Stadium. And seeing bands like that, you get to see people, know people that you see out on the common. They know what's going on, and you meet one, you meet another. And bands were playing in local clubs and stuff, and I used to go to the folky ones like Jack's on Mass Ave, and the blues ones like the Speakeasy or Joe's Place. And I saw a lot of blues.
Who were some of those bands that were playing on that circuit? I need to get grounded in the
in the
time who
rock
was
circuit.
playing.
There were some bands that were local bands that I had never heard of, but became fans of. I saw the Modern Lovers a bunch of times. I saw them on the Common, and I saw them at a club called the Catacombs. I saw another band called Dazzle down there, and there used to be a bar in Alston called the Grog.
Oh, yeah.
And the Grog had a lot of glitter was popular at the time as well, and there were a lot of glitter bands that hung around there and stuff.
Or like Mark Bolan sounding
Yeah,
bands?
yeah, and that was a cool dive in its time. There were a couple other clubs around the Boylston Street area where the Catacombs was, and it was just mind-boggling to me. It was all wide open and great. This is early 70s, and I was a fan of WBCN and listened to Max Ann's show in the early 70s. She had a 2 o'clock show. And she was playing stuff that the other DJs weren't playing. Like you could always count on her to be playing New York Dolls and T-Rex, as well as soul music, you know, like Philly Soul we were talking about earlier and stuff. She was one of the most eclectic DJs I'd ever heard. She had a knack for segues that, you know, I was just blown away by.
That's when BCM was still kind of a real independent
hip
station.
Yeah, yep.
It had that completely different non-corporate kind of feel, and it was like they really did have a lot of personalities
did.
there back in those days. Yeah,
it was freeform radio, and it really was. And I would call her up during the show a lot of times, so she kind of knew who I was a little. And she went into the hospital, and I wrote her some letters and stuff, and she said, you know, give me your number and I'll call you when, you know, I get out. And she called and she says, come on up to the station, I'll get you a job. And, you know, I started out just interning and working on the listener line. And then I got an actual job training the people on the listener line and working as a librarian at the station, you know, the record librarian. And eventually became her production assistant. And
was that your first like normal job in Boston?
well, I worked in a record store in a plaza down on Cambridge Street near Government Center, and then it.
What was the store?
I'm trying to think. I think it was called Sight and Sound.
Oh, I remember that place. Yeah.
And you know, and I lived near there. I lived at the bottom of Beacon Hill, and.
Back when poor people could live in Beacon Hill?
Yeah, yeah. It was amazing. The place we lived in and what it is now, what it goes for now, it's a bazillion bucks. But there was about 6 or 7 of us that lived in that place. And people that had been part of the New York scene and people that became a part of the Boston scene, like Oedipus was my roommate, Eddie. And so I got the job up at BCN, and through Max Ann, I met a lot of people. She was very influential and instrumental in breaking bands nationally. Jay Giles' band, Aerosmith, she broke them nationally. She had a healthy hand in it.
We had Aerosmith at my high school in like 1972, so that was before they obviously had broken
Before that,
nationally.
yeah.
And I remember listening to Max Ann's show and hearing Aerosmith on the thing, and I couldn't believe we got him to play at our high school.
Yeah, I saw Aerosmith. Ready Teddy opened up Aerosmith, and then the New York Dolls at a roadhouse in Ashland, Mass, at the Cricket Club. It was pretty awesome.
Oh my God!
And you know,
that place should be like a national landmark
for that, and you get to
that
know
one
the
show.
band and stuff, and I became friends with Ready Teddy, another local band. I remember seeing them around at the club in Cambridge, which became Night Stage.
Downtown drinking about all the thinking that I should be doing today. Well, girls don't bother on saving my dollars, not gonna rainy day. I said I ain't ready to eat no spaghetti, no dining out tonight. I feel so lame, my feet look the same. I want to find the things in life. I just got to have my novelty shoes. Talking about them ball busting boots. Drag on red, white, and blue. You're a flash when you're wearing them too.
And Max Ann broke Queen. She had, the label had Queen sent her in Boston for a week to 10 days to go meet other DJs, go different radio stations, just to try and get a foothold in America.
Is that when they did Queen 1? Was that the album that was like
Queen
in the
1
early...
didn't make it here. It's you know, it was
That's the one that had
released
Keep
here.
Yourself Alive on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But Queen 2 is the one that actually broke them in the States. And she had to take Freddie Mercury around to this and that, and Brian May, and I, she asked me to babysit the rhythm section for the most part. So for a week we were going to Father's every afternoon and
right across the street, right? Yeah. I was
and
right there in
watching the
college.
game or something.
10-cent hot dogs.
Yeah,
in PBS.
we had hot dogs.
No, Knickerbockers.
Yep.
Knickerbockers and 10-cent hot dogs.
So again, she was influential to the rest of the city, to New England, to the rest of the country in breaking these bands, and influential to me. She turned me on to this stuff. Keith Moon came to town to promote some movie that he was in called That'll Be the Day with David Essex, and he came up to the studio and he got there early, and she says to me, "Okay, take him away a little bit and babysit him for 10 minutes," and we came back changed people. And, it was pretty wild. That was pretty great. So at that time, I'm saying I was really interested in starting a band.
Okay, I just want to back up for a second. So you've been up here for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And you're checking out the music scene.
Yeah.
Are you playing with anybody? Are you playing acoustic? Are you doing anything? What are you doing for yourself musically?
I had an acoustic that I fooled around with. I earned a little money doing things, and I got my first electric guitar, and I think one of the first songs I learned on it was a Mata Hoople song,
Of course.
and then Silver Train by the Stones. And I was, I had been in bands, like I say, in Philly, just as a singer, but I was really interested in starting one up here. And a guy started working as an intern at BCN, and we got really friendly and stuff. We immediately clicked, and Willie Loco had just released a single called Mass Ave.
I love that song, yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's like an anthem for Boston.
It's like nothing I heard before on the radio either.
Us too.
Out of a Boston
and
band.
Billy Lesigian's guitar, I remember Peter and I looking at each other and saying, "That's a sound. That's, let's do a band. It's time. It's just about to burst open." And we formed a band called DMZ. I thought about doing DJ work as well, and Maxan offered me a job over at WTBS, which is now MBR.
The MIT radio station.
Yeah, MIT. But we were just getting the band off the ground, and I said to my roommate, who became Oedipus, I said, "Why don't you take the radio show, and we'll give you these records here to play." And
Really?
that's how that started, yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
And
so Oedipus started off on TBS?
yeah.
Oh, that's
yeah.
interesting. I thought I always associated him with BCN.
He was bugging me to get him a job at BCN, and the news department there was looking for a new assistant. And I said, "Listen, I know somebody who could really fit the bill." And Eddie came up and auditioned and got the job. And so his first gig at BCN was in the news department with Danny Schechter.
Danny Schechter, the news dissector.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. This is all coming back.
So the band's, that band started in late '75, early '76. We went to see Patti Smith play at Paul's Mall, the Jazz Workshop, one of the two, and when her first album was just released, and that was life-changing.
What was the Patti Smith album? Was that
Horses?
Horses. That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, and
with Dancing Barefoot on it. And
yeah, and they ended the set with My Generation. John Cale was playing bass for them at the time, and he put his bass through the ceiling and stuff. And we knew that something new was just happening. It was just breaking, and we wanted in. And we practiced and blah, 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 and did a frat party, and got a gig at the Rat in May, I think. And we started trading off gigs with New York bands. We'd say, hey, if you get us a gig down there, we'll get you a gig up here. So on a Friday night, we go down and play with, anybody. And on Saturday, we come and play at the Rat and stuff. And it's that situation. Other bands started doing the same thing, and we started to get to know all these people, like Mink DeVille and Blondie, and people who were just starting out, doing the same thing we were in New York. Nobody was famous yet, it was just starting to crack. And I remember going down to TBS. I had to do an interview for a show we had coming up with Suicide. And when I went down there, Nick Lowe was there with Jake Rivera and Elvis Costello. I had just gotten this single that Nick Lowe did under an alias, a single called Snuffin' It in Babylon. And it was just some reggae spoof on the Jim Jones thing of the era. And
lighthearted.
Yeah, very lighthearted, Snuffin' It in Babylon. And I remember asking him for his autograph. And Elvis Costello was a little perturbed that I wasn't paying much attention to him, or attention wasn't being paid to him, but I didn't know him. I knew who Nick Lowe was, though. He asked if he could come to our show that night, and I said, yeah, be happy to put you on the list. Put me on the list for your show at the Paradise. And he squawked and didn't really want to. I don't have any control over that. And I said, well, good luck trying to get in our show. I don't.
Is this Elvis?
Yeah. And he came down to the Rat and tried to get in, and the bouncers came down to get me, and they said, there's some English twit up there who says his name is Elvis, and he says he's supposed to be on the guest list. And I went upstairs and I asked him, did you put me on your list? He said, no. I said, no, I can't come in unless he pays. And
$2 probably, right?
Yeah, it was only a couple of bucks. It was like, dude, come on. And, I'm only saying that to emphasize that nobody had made it yet. Nobody knew who each other was or about to be or anything like it. And, I tell that story has been told a number of times. I'm not proud of it now. It's not, nobody wants to be an asshole. Nobody intends to be,
Right.
It's not intentional. Sometimes it just happens. And he was and I was. And, we were both digging in our heels.
When assholes collide.
Yeah. And, meanwhile, Nick Lowe and Jake Rivera, they're laughing at it. And, but those things happen. And, we had a lot of bands that came through that nobody had heard of. And, like the Police. We played with the Police one time, or I was in a band that played with the Police.
That was still DMZ?
Well, I was in a band called the Mark Thor Band as well.
Oh, yeah.
They were on the Live at the Rat album, and he got a bunch of us together to support him, and we got a gig out of it, actually, opening for the Police.
I've had
many people there at all, and they were all pissy about it and upset because there wasn't a big crowd and stuff. But there wasn't big crowds for us when we went to different cities and stuff, and it's just the way it was.
Well, that's the reality of rock and roll. Especially when a scene is starting out. So I just want to back up for a second. One of the things that
Sure.
I want to bring the folks back to Boston. So when you guys are playing, when DMZ just starts out, and the other guys that you're playing with, so who are your contemporaries? Who else is like populating the Rat on a regular basis? What are the bands that are down there? Like, because I think I was there. I'm going to get the right dates in here, but yeah.
Well, our first date there was in '76, April or May of '76. The Real Kids were. We went to see the Real Kids a couple times, and we really liked them. That was somebody we could relate to, and I personally have been a huge fan of theirs all along. I love John Felice's songwriting, and I like the way the band
And he played with the Modern Lovers too. So do you know?
he
him back
played.
then?
Yeah, he was in an early formation of the Modern Lovers.
Okay.
And Mickey Cleanin' the Mez was another band.
I remember them.
Mickey wrote some great songs, and Asa Brebner, the lady Asa Brebner, was his lead guitar player, and he went through a couple of drummers, but one of them was Howie Ferguson, who later went into the Real Kids. So there were bands that we could identify with. The Inflictors were another.
Inflictors. Where'd you get that cigarette?
Yeah, where'd you get?
I
Yeah,
always remember that one. Yeah.
They were a good band, and who never made a splash like they could have.
They were cool looking too, as I recall.
They were odd looking.
Yeah.
Everybody was different, and their drummer Gary was a good. Well, all of them were good guys. That was one of the things about the early Rat scene. There was a good deal of camaraderie between some of the bands. We used to borrow the Real Kids PA system to rehearse with all the time. Well, we'd rent it from them.
You weren't that close.
Yeah, it was nominal, like $25 or something, and everybody throws in $5 and we get a PA. And I remember when we were changing lead singers, we asked Alpo to come up and audition, and because I really liked him and the way he sang and stuff. And
Alpo sang with the Real Kids.
yeah, he was their bass player. Yeah, with the Brian Jones haircut and stuff. But Alpo did Search and Destroy. He did a couple Stooges songs with us, and he was great. But he was loyal to the Kids, and he wasn't leaving. But it was fun working with him for the time.
Now, Reddy Teddy was in the scene then at that time too, right?
Yeah, I saw Reddy Teddy in '72 or '3. Well, I saw them with the Dolls and Aerosmith show. But they used to play at a place called the Club in Cambridge.
Yep.
On Main Street that became Night Stage. And I think it had been called the Ace of Clubs or something, or the Two of Clubs. But our first date at the Rat, the very next day was our first date at the Club and stuff. And I had seen Reddy Teddy there several times years before, and I really liked him. I saw Willie Loco there as well, and there was something raw and primitive and flash and exciting at the same time that I could relate to. It was something that was, it wasn't like the bands you heard on the radio, like the Sweet and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Brewer and Shipley. All these bands.
I even forgot about them.
But Doobie Brothers and stuff like that, we couldn't relate to it at all.
Yeah.
However, trying to get gigs early on, the owners of clubs wanted somebody that was like the Doobie Brothers or Brewer and Shipley. They wanted just nice middle of the road stuff, and they didn't want people like DMZ who wore makeup and were ruthless on stage. I mean,
You guys actually wore makeup? Was that like a kind of outcropping from like the glam stuff? Or?
yeah, from the dolls, yeah,
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah, we did, for better or worse, and but we did all the time. It was like, it wasn't just for stage. That's just the way we looked
Really?
and the way we dressed. Yeah, man. I mean, you got to live it. You can't just put it on as an act.
Yeah.
So it was really difficult to get gigs outside of a couple clubs in Boston.
They would have thought you were nuts.
They would. That's
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Think you're nuts. It's hard enough to deal with long hair in that period of
Right.
time. Coming out of the early '70s, it's like they still think long hair people are causing trouble. You put boys
Exactly.
in makeup, and it's like, yeah,
You
I don't
can't
think
have
so. This is 1972.
We played this this place in Peabody or Saugus or something out on Route 1, and we're loading our stuff in, and there's a band up there all in matching, uniforms, little
Like the old
tux things,
Beatles and Herman's Hermits.
yeah. And we came on, and they came up after the first song, and they said, "Turn it down." The second song, they said, "Turn it down or you're out of here." And we turned it up.
That's rock and roll.
Because said, "We're going to be thrown out of here. Let's go out in a blaze." And we finished the song, and there were cops there and everything, and they let us out of town and to the edge of the town limits and all this stuff. It was so ridiculous. But
And this is DMZ.
yeah,
Oh,
and people did not want it at all. They didn't want to hear about it. They didn't want to hear that. It heard 10 seconds of the demo, and they didn't understand. And in hindsight, I can't expect them to. And there was a lot of just, giving them the finger type of attitude.
So what was that? What was that sound like? And we're gonna hear a couple of cuts anyway. So why don't we because it's very jarring coming from like listening to even like a Led Zeppelin album.
Yeah.
Which is a little more structured to getting 3-chord rock where you're just like nuts. So what are some of the tunes that you play? Was it like garage rock tunes that you guys started with, or original stuff, or what?
Well, when Peter and I first
Peter
did the
Greenberg.
first set, Peter Greenberg and I did the first set list for the first shows and stuff. It was just covers, and it was typical garage rock covers. There'd be a Stones here or Roxy Music, even a Bowie thing or a couple Doll
A
songs.
Queen Bitch or something like that.
Something.
Yeah, rock and roll though, right?
Yeah, and our first lead singer didn't work out, so we got another one who was Jeff Conley, Mono Man, and Jeff brought in a lot of tunes, and he started writing tunes, and that was good. But we were playing stuff by the Flamin' Groovies, the Stooges, MC5, mixed in with girl group stuff. We played stuff by the Shangri-Las and stuff. And,
Really?
yeah, I give them a great big kiss and stuff. And,
Did you punk them up?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the audiences loved it at the Rat and at Cantones and at the few clubs in town that catered to this. They ate it up. They loved it. Some of them did. You could see tables of people getting up and leaving immediately because it was off the wall. Like you say, jarring. That's a very good word for it. And we would argue on stage between ourselves, and push would come to shove. And I think David Robinson talked about it in a recent film. He'd look around to wonder where the band was, and we're all on the floor wrestling and stuff. And it was volatile. That's the kind of music it was, and it's the kind of people we were.
There's a lot of drinking involved, do you think?
Some people imbibed with all kinds of things. It was a free-for-all, and you were young, and you were, there was no problem in meeting girls and stuff, or women, you know, you're young kids and you're getting jacked up and raising hell and having a good time. And, you know, who wouldn't want to do that? And, you know, we tried our best to be calm, but when people are handing you free drinks all night and free other things, it's difficult to remain polite and sober on stage.
It sounds like that. So one of the other things you were talking about that you started mentioning, like, so people aren't used to this kind of music at all, and it's like, so then you start to get some clubs. So let's talk about some of the clubs. So you mentioned the club.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you and I talked Cantones, which I loved, which was like an Italian restaurant during the day, and then it was a punk club at night.
Yeah.
And I loved that place. And then there was the Underground, was short-lived in Alston, I think.
Yeah.
Then there was the Space, which was in the financial district,
right,
which made no sense. That was
as was Cantones. That was in the financial.
Oh, that's right,
district.
Cantones. Yeah. That's okay. So why don't you talk about some of the clubs and tell me some stories?
The guy that ran Cantones, you know, it was an Italian lunch place for the financiers, and his son Mario wanted to put clubs in there.
Now, this is Mario. That's the comedian.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. He's hilarious.
He is. Well, he started booking gigs in there, and it was a back room with one bare light bulb hanging down. And the girls' room was off of the stage, so the girls had to go up on the stage to go into the girls' room and stuff. And, you know, it was embarrassing and stuff. But people had a blast in that joint, and it was filthy. There was rats everywhere and stuff. And to think that people were eating there and paying high prices for it during the day is crazy. But I remember doing a show there with the Cramps when they first started. You know, they were in a similar boat as us. You just couldn't get a gig. And they came up and played Cantones with us and stuff. And Mario went on to other things. He got a TV show, WOR New York, and it was he was sort of like a Pee Wee Herman type guy, and he was off the wall, but he would have bands on. He'd have the Ramones on and stuff, and you know, it was always fun to watch because it was Mario being nuts.
He's a really highly animated guy besides being funny, and he was like a real kind of over-the-top, like Paul Lindish kind of character too, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So he was hilarious, and that was before anybody knew what that meant.
Right. And he was a fun guy. He was off the wall. He was a fun guy.
So I had a children's show at one time. I did. It was called Steam Pipe Alley, and it was. Some of you know it. Oh wow. A lot of people don't though, because it was like in New York. I did it for five years with children. 5 years of booze and dope.
The Ramones, it was the same thing. One of their first shows before the first album came up was at the club in Cambridge, and we were there, of course, and stuff. And we were lucky to know who some of these bands were before they had any notoriety outside of New York. And
because you've been doing this back and forth with them.
Right, with bands. And with having Eddie as a DJ, he would be getting singles in the mail and stuff, and of course we'd play everything and say, okay, this band, we want to play with this one, play with that one. Orc Records, Terry Orc was, one of the first. He had Little Johnny Jewel by Television and stuff, and
Television was in the early 70s?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they were on Orc
Richard
Records.
Lloyd and
Tom Verlaine.
Tom Verlaine. Yeah, I couldn't remember the other guy's name. Okay.
I saw them in a place next to where the Paradise is. There used to be a place called Plymouth Rock, and they played there in about 74 or 5.
Wow.
I saw them there. And that later became a club called Dummies that had a bunch of marionettes everywhere. That was a weird joint.
Sounds creepy.
It was.
I don't think I'd ever go in there.
So the 2 or 3 clubs that we could play in here and bring bands up from New York, they would bring us down there to the 2 or 3 clubs, CBGB, Max's, and a couple others.
You're gonna wake up one morning, the sun beats you down. You're gonna wake up one morning as the sun breaks you down. You're gonna look around your myself, you're gonna find it out gone. You didn't realize, you didn't realize, you didn't realize, you didn't realize, you didn't realize. Oh, you're gonna miss me, baby. Oh, you're gonna miss me, baby. Oh, you're gonna miss me, child. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I remember one time we went down to CBGB for one of our first shows there, and the New York Times said, also appearing from Cleveland, Ohio, the Dead Boys, and that was their first gig there. And we became friendly with them, and our releases were around the same time, our first releases and stuff. And
The EP. The EP or the record?
The record, actually. The EP did us good. We did an EP for a label called Bump Records, Greg Shaw's infamous Bump Records. And we recorded that out in Jamaica Plain on Center Street with the producer who had done work with Blondie and Ramones and stuff. And that EP was really good and paved the way and got us signed to Sire Records later on. And it was some originals and covers and stuff, but that record showed who we were much more than our album did.
The EP.
Yes, the EP.
That was what, 4 songs?
4 songs. There were 4 songs released, but we actually had 10 or 11 that came out later on a 12-inch on Vox Records. And it was all right. It was good. It was better than the Sire record. But I remember going down to New York to do a TV show, the same channel that Mario Cantone was on WOR. And we were on some stupid Soul Train type show. It was called Soapbox or something, Soap Factory. And the Ramones, Joey Ramone came along for support. The Paley Brothers came along, and we're all in the dressing room jamming and stuff. And I remember doing Hey, Let's Go, Richie Valens tune. And we were on the show with one of the power funk bands with, it wasn't Parliament, I'll think of the name soon, but they were coming by in their big platform shoes and their space suits and looking in at us like we're out of our heads. And oddly enough, that's the song that we did on the show, Out of Our Head. And we had to go out and lip sync to this thing. And it's the first time on TV. We can't hear anything. It's all blasting.
Such a crazy gal. Stepped in your
were, I think we might have tried a substance that got us high, and we didn't know what the hell.
Which
was
direction
going on.
did you high in though? There was a lot to choose from back then, as I recall. If you were taking Quaaludes, I think it would be a little bit different than taking Black Beauties at
That's
Crossroads.
exactly right. Yep. Yeah, I remember having a T-shirt that said 714 on it with a line across it, which was the inscription on the Quaaludes. And Roman Polanski had just been arrested for having the underage girl in his bathtub when they were on Quaaludes. And I had the 714 and Free Roman Polanski on the back. And
It was a family show, right?
yeah, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be talking about that type of stuff. But the BT Express, that was the name of the
BT
band.
Express, yeah, I remember them. Yeah.
And they went out and they did their thing, and then we went out and did our thing, and it was just crazy. But it's all new, I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and then you know it. I remember going to different things like that with the Dead Boys and stuff, and bringing them up here, and it was all new to everybody. Malcolm McLaren had come to New York, and he saw Richard Hell.
In the Voidoids.
Yeah, and he went back home and he dressed up kids that worked in his store to look like that, to look like Richard Hell, and spike their hair, and they became the Sex Pistols and stuff, and which, in some ways, having done that, they were like the Monkees. They were a contrived, put together band. Now you're going to be punks, and you're going to look like this, and you're going to dress like that, and you're going to give the finger to everybody, and it was to me.
No,
It was put on.
You know what's funny? So I remember seeing the movie Great Rock and Roll Swindle.
Yeah.
And I remember Malcolm McLaren saying exactly what you just said.
Really?
This is what he was doing. This was my intent to put together, and he was talking, it was a swindle. Now, I'm
Yeah.
someone who happens to think that, as we were saying on the way over here, Never Mind the Bollocks to me is like just a great album. And I'm sure they don't play that well on stage.
None of us did.
Yeah.
We sure
yeah,
didn't.
yeah. But it makes more. It's coming from someone that was there. I thought it was just him being an egomaniac, talking about how he was like the puppet master. But
Well, he was, and I'd never seen that movie, so I'm not quoting it.
okay,
I never saw it.
it's interesting. Yeah,
That was just the observation that he put together a band like Don Kirshner put together the Monkees, and he went back to England and put together a band that became the Sex Pistols.
based on seeing Richard Hell and
Yes,
the Voidoids.
yeah.
Wow, I never knew that.
And for my money, I'll take the Clash any day. They were more of a pub band. There was a scene before punk rock. I really hated the term punk rock. I always did. I still do. I never liked having DMZ lumped into that. We were just a rock and roll band, and we played a lot of different kinds of rock and roll. And it's more leaning towards garage, I guess, than punk. But along with the Sex Pistols came this scene, punk.
Yeah.
Turn me on and get me high.
remember when we played with the Dead Boys the first time, they all had long hair like us, really long hair. And then the next time we see them, it's all cut short and safety pins and all this crap.
It always looked kind of contrived to me. And I remember Kenmore Square and seeing all these people walking through the thing, and I just didn't. It didn't seem like real because they weren't the people that I was in the clubs with.
Right.
I mean, we just wore jeans and mostly black T-shirts.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately I still dress the exact same way.
I hear you.
Black T-shirt on today. So
I'm
I'm a little old to be a punk.
I often say in different meetings of people that I'm with that, you know, no one has a right to have more than 72 black T-shirts, but that's all you wore back then and stuff.
That's about how many I have.
So, to get back, we came back down to New York, and Dead Boys changed their look completely. And I remember Stiv saying to me, "Oh man, when are you going to cut your hair?"
Stiv Baders.
Yeah, Stiv Baders. And he said, "When are you going to cut your hair? You guys should cut your hair and dress more punk. You know, it's what all the nonconformists are doing now." And I said, "Did you hear what you just said? I mean, I'm sorry. All the nonconformists are doing this. Okay, great."
I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine years and years ago, and I say, like, look, if you're all dressed in exactly the same, how are you any different than guys that are working in the financial district during the day?
Yep.
And if you're in, you know, the people in the cantons just have a different uniform at night than they do during the guys in the day.
Right.
So I totally get what you're talking about. So we were talking about DMZ, and I think we forgot to bring in how it came together, who the guys were, stuff like that. So for the people who don't know DMZ, why don't you just give us an update?
Sure. Well, they won't know the guys or where they came from either. But in order to help that happen, Peter Greenberg, as I said, was a guy that I met. He was interning at WBCN when I was working there, and people had said to me, "Oh, you should meet this guy. You guys got a lot in common. You dress similar and blah, blah, blah." Because we really didn't dress like most of the people on the street. And the first time we saw each other, we didn't need an introduction. It was just, "Oh, you." And when we started this thing, he said, "Oh, I know a friend. I've got a friend, Mike Lewis, who plays bass. And he lives at a frat house in Kenmore Square, and we can sometimes rehearse at his place." I said, "All right, that's cool." And then
This is like 73, 74?
this is late 75,
Okay.
Early 76. So JJ, Peter Greenberg, Mike Lewis on bass, and well, we're going to need a drummer. We get a drummer. His name is Mike Lewis as well. So we had two Mike Lewises, so we called one bass and the other drums. You know, I mean, it was the only way we could distinguish it. And we knew we needed a singer because my voice was never great. I sang in bands in the 60s, but, you know, much to people's chagrin. And somehow Peter or one of them knew of this BU kid, Adam Schwartz. And Adam was this real good-looking, groovy-looking 70s type guy who did know a lot about the New York scene, the New York underground scene. And that was good. And he talked a great story. And he would come to rehearsals with lots of cool records. And we said, all right, because, you know, Peter and I were big record collectors. You know, we were both working in a radio station and getting free records, and we used to go out record shopping all the time. And now this kid, Adam, is coming in with records. And he would sing, and everything seemed good. He had great stage presence. But because you're playing so loud, you really can't hear what the hell's going on. And we did a gig, Mike Lewis and Mike Lewis, Peter Greenberg and me, and Adam. He changed his name from Adam Schwartz to Adam Baum.
Who wouldn't?
And he wanted us to be the secret weapons, and we said that's not going to happen.
Boy, a singer with an ego problem. I never heard of that before.
Imagine,
No.
you know? I mean, gee, you should feel lucky to be with us. So I said, all right, you know, we tried to think of names. You want something with military. I came up with the name DMZ, and it was, you know, 3 capital letters. It would look good in print, like MC5. You could pick it out on a page right away. You just knew it. It jumped out.
DMZ's playing tonight.
Yeah, and, you know, that looked good, and everybody agreed on that. We did the first gig, and Adam bombed. He just froze. He held the microphone and looked like a deer caught in the headlights. He just bombed.
Oh, no.
And we couldn't get him to sing. And, you know, we're kicking him. We're doing everything we can to prompt it, because we got this crowd. There was about 300 people there. We advertised it as DMZ and free beer. Who wouldn't go? So during the break, we're pulling Adam aside and, look, you know, is there some kind of emotional problem we can discuss, or do we just beat the shit out of you? I mean, what the fuck is wrong with you? So Adam didn't pick it up on the second set, and Peter and I wound up trading off songs singing. You know, and I'm singing old Stone songs that I did in the 60s and stuff, just to get through the night. But again, like I say, with everything so loud, you can't hear anyway. So we pulled through the night, and we fired him the next day, and we started holding auditions. And one of the guys that auditioned was Jeff Conley, who called himself Mono Man. And it turned out that this Jeff Conley was the one that was supplying Adam with these cool records for us to play. So I said, well, he's the source. But he was nuts. He was just off the wall, and at the audition he was screaming and howling. He got on the floor, he's crawling around. He curled up inside the bass drum, you know, and he's singing like that, and he's hanging out the window. And we said, well, he passed the audition.
Could he sing?
You know, this is it. And it was going to be loopy, and we knew that. But
He's also a really good singer.
he's a great singer.
Yeah, yeah,
And
so it's-
he knew his shit.
Yeah.
And it just fit with the rest of us. It just fit. I mean, you know. So that was the lineup.
Did any of these guys come from other bands?
Not that I knew. Jeff never had, no. You know, not that I knew of.
And you had just started playing guitar like in 1970 or something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. When I was in bands in the 60s, I was a singer. I played acoustic guitar. Everybody did.
Yeah.
But I didn't have an electric guitar till the Martha Hoople show. And so we started auditioning for, you know, singers, and we get Jeff, and we get a demo made at Intermedia Sound Studios on what's the Groovy Street in Back Bay there?
Newbury?
Newbury Street. Thank you. And I think Aerosmith did a lot of their demos and early work there, the first album there. And,
Sounds familiar.
and we saw a notice in one of the music stores that they're holding classes to teach kids engineering in studios. And if you're a band and you want to get a free demo, you come in and let the engineers, you know, do the demo. You know, it's kind of like if you're poor and need dental work, you go to Tufts and let the interns do it.
Like I do now.
Yeah, well, there you go. I hear it, pal. I would too if I had teeth. So we did that, and we went down and did a 2-song demo, and that became our, you know, calling card, so to speak.
With a band is rocking and everybody's screaming, alright! Well, it's a dance tonight, there's sure gonna be a fight. Somebody's gonna get their head kicked in tonight. Well, the joint is jumping and everybody's shouting for more. Well, there's gonna be a pool of blood on the dance hall floor. Oh, somebody's gonna get their head kicked in tonight.
And we played with that lineup through May or June. And then our drummer told us that he was going to go away and go to school or something. Mike Lewis drums. And we needed a new drummer. And we weren't psyched about auditioning for it. Jimmy Harold at the Rat said we can use the club and audition people, and that was nice, but it seemed like a pain in the ass because the original thing came together rather organically. And I was working at Strawberries at their first store in Copley
Kenmore?
Square. Copley, before
Copley, okay,
before the
yeah.
Kenmore. Copley was first, and I used to sit on a ladder by the door and watch for shoplifters. And this guy,
That's a good job.
I knew what to look for, but you know,
No stranger to shoplifting.
no, exactly. So you know what to look for.
Exactly.
So a guy comes in, and he says to me, "Hey, didn't you play at the Rat the other night?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "I saw you guys. I thought you were from New York. I didn't know you were from Boston." I said, "No, we're here." He says, "Oh, when are you playing again? I'd love to come and see you." And I said, "Well, our drummer just gave notice, and we got to get a new drummer." And he said, "What about me? Can I try out?" And it turned out to be David Robinson from the Modern Lovers. And I said, "You could more than try out, man. All you got to do is show up." And I was pretty much decided right then and there that, because I loved his drumming on the album, and the Boston Sound is not the 60s Boston Sound,
Yeah.
Ultimate Spinach, but the sound that people relate to the Boston groups from the 70s. It's centered around drums as far as I was concerned, and there were some really great drummers that made that, and David Robinson was one. Howie Ferguson from the Real Kids was another. Jeff Wilkinson was another from the Nervous Heaters. There was just this sound that was instantly identifiable as Boston rock.
First thing I noticed when I listened to the DMZ records, I went back and listened to them. I go, "Who's this drummer?" It's the first thing that I noticed. I mean, no disrespect to the rest of the band, but I was just blown away.
It's true, and in that same working at Strawberries on that stepladder when David Robinson came in and asked that question, within weeks a guy came in and he said, "Hey, do you have any Flamin' Groovies records?" And, you know, I've been asked that maybe 4 times in 30 years. And that turned out to be Paul Murphy, the drummer we got later on.
Wow.
That was just coincidence. But
So being your shoplifting job is actually the best drummer.
I was
drummer,
auditioning. It was great, and it's good publicity for DMZ.
how's that for serendipity?
Yeah. So David Robinson did join the band, and we played through the 4th of July for that. That was the bicentennial. 1976 being the bicentennial. It was a very volatile time in Boston's history. There was a lot of stuff going on.
Busing.
The school busing thing was really big and hot. There was disco versus other kinds of music. And Kenmore Square, there was always brawls in the square. And people from Southie would come over and beat up on this group of people, and people from the disco across the street would come over and, there was a lot of anger.
So they just set it up for the people. So if you know where the Rat is in Kenmore Square, there was the Rat, and then across the street there was that the Boston Club? What was that? It ended up being Katie's and some other stuff.
Yeah, that was
next
yeah.
door. But then there
Lucifer's.
Lucifer's was
Yeah.
the disco. Okay, Lucifer's was
Yeah.
the discos.
Yeah.
Katie's was still a rock joint.
Yep.
Sort of, but it was not like the Rat. It was like more like standard rock and roll.
Right, I saw ZZ Top there, Bo Diddley, saw
Okay.
New York Dolls there. So there was a lot of violence on the news in Boston, big time. And it carried over, and Kenmore Square was one of the places. So it was, again, it was a volatile time. Robinson's now in the band. There's talk about making a Live at the Rat album. There was a Live at the CBGB album that was getting some notice, and Jimmy Harold, not one to miss a trick, says, I'm going to do an album. And a guy named Mark Thor was trying to put together a band, and he recruited me, somebody from Thunder Train, somebody from The Boys, from the group The Boys. He got the bass player, Ricky Caraccio, and this great drummer, Angel, Chuck Myra, unbelievable drummer. And we would rehearse together, and we got along well. And the bass player, Ricky, and I really got along. And he kept on saying, hey, when are you going to get me in DMZ? And I said, what about The Boys? You sound great in The Boys. He was one of the highlights in the band.
And they were one of the early, I hate to use the word, punk bands.
Yeah,
Well, I
early
remember
rap
the Boys
bands.
from a long
Yeah.
time ago. Yeah.
And they were good guys, and they were, but he said, well, they're my friends, but if I can get in DMZ, I will. And it happened that Mike Lewis, the bass player, now gave his notice. He was going to go to school in New York, and we had an opening.
So you started with two Lewises and you lost them both?
We lost them both that summer.
That's your Mike Lewis problem.
Yeah. And we got Ricky Caraccio on bass. And to me, that was a great, great lineup. I loved that band. And we did a lot of recording at TBS, just on one mic. There's a couple of bootleg CDs that have all these demos or whatever they're called, of us just on one microphone. And they sound great. They sound really raw and primitive, and I guess one might say punk. But...
The band is rocking and everybody's screaming, alright! Well, it's a dance tonight, there's sure gonna be a fight. Somebody's gonna get their head kicked in tonight. Well, the joint is jumping and everybody's shouting for more. Well, there's gonna be a pool of blood on the dance hall floor. Oh, somebody's gonna get their head kicked in tonight.
I just want to just set the timeline here. So, have you made the EP yet?
No.
Okay, so this is
we're a year
pre-EP.
away from
Okay,
that.
okay,
yeah.
cool. All right.
We're just gearing up to make the Live at the Rat album.
Okay.
And this guy Mark Thor wanted this combo to play behind him for his entry into the album, into the Live at the Rat album. And it was, doing that album was Mike Lewis, bass player, his last thing with us. And then in that fall, Ricky became a full-time member, and David Robinson was with us for another couple of months, and then he got an offer he couldn't refuse from some band. I think they were called the Cars. And
I think I've heard of them.
yeah, they had been a band called Captain Swing, and they played at the Rat a couple times, but it didn't quite click with the scene. But something called New Wave was starting to happen, and they went that route. I didn't want to lose Robinson and DMZ, but the offer he got was, they were going to make some money. We weren't. And if we did, we were going to spend it. So, no hard feelings towards him. He's still a great guy. Matter of fact, we're still friends. I saw him recently, and he's a good guy. But he went on to the Cars, and Ricky had a friend named Paul Murphy. They both had played in a band called the Children's Rock and Roll, which was an offshoot of the Real Kids. And he brought this guy, Paul Murphy, down to rehearse. And lo and behold, he was the guy who asked me for the Flamin' Groovies records a couple months before. And I said, well, it's kind of kismet and stuff. And that became the lineup for the next few years that we did all of the recording with.
On my mind, it's on my soul. I feel lost, out of control. I can't stand no pain. I can't stand no pain. I can't stand no pain. Can't stand no pain.
The EP, the first album.
The EP, the first album, any bootlegs that came thereafter, that was what people say is the definitive lineup for the seminal group to change the course of Boston rock. All the crap that they say. I hate the word seminal. I thought it was an Indian tribe from Florida.
Seminoles.
So
That's good.
that was pretty much the history. The DMZ stayed in that lineup until the end. Actually, Peter Greenberg quit when the album came out, and we replaced him with another guitarist, Preston Wayne, and he was with us until the last hurrah.
So it's irresponsible for me not to talk about the album. So the EP comes out, and that's what you guys were happy with.
That's what we sounded like.
And what happened when you did the album?
We wanted producer X. They said no. And they wanted producer A. And we said no. We wanted producer Y. And they said no. And they wanted producer B. And we said no. And on, different names, different reasons. And then eventually they said, you're going with Flo and Eddie. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is the way it goes, and this is when it begins. And
Flo and Eddie from the Turtles. And
from the Turtles and
then
Mother's
Invention, yeah.
Who were nice guys. They were fun to get high with if you did those things. They had terrific sense of humor, obviously.
Hilarious.
Yeah, and
They were Zappa.
sitting around, hanging around together, it was a blast. And although they had been in 60s bands, they didn't quite grasp our interpretation of 60s music,
And you still had very much a garage sound at that point.
We did.
Yeah.
It was much more. We weren't the Turtles. We were more the Chocolate Watch Band, or the Seeds, or something. And they didn't understand our way of working out problems, like beating each other up. And we were snowed into a studio when we recorded the album. It was during the Great Blizzard of '78, and we were snowed in to a studio, and we had no way to get food. There was just a candy machine that went dry quick.
Is this 78?
Yeah, and it was difficult time being in those kind of quarters. You couldn't get out. We were all sleeping on the floor. We're paying for hotels that are down the road, but you can't get there because it was snowed in. I mean, it took 2 days for us to get outside the door, to get the door free, and then try and find a Burger King or something where we get something other than a candy bar. And we're calling up the record company and saying, you got to bring us drugs, you got to bring us money, you got to bring us food. And, somebody eventually did.
In that order? Drugs, money, and food?
Yeah.
Gotta get your
That was
priorities
pretty
straight.
much it, yeah. And the sound that came out of that album, we were really greatly disappointed with. There was a mixture of slick and people being unsure of what was going on. It had taken such a long time between signing with the label and actually recording the album that we had changed the album 3-4 times. We changed the songs that we were going to do on it.
Right.
Like Sire had said, do this song and this song and this song. By the time got to record, we had written all these new songs and stuff. And, some songs were brand new when we recorded them and stuff. And
So it was a case of not having you, was it the production, or was it not having your A material that you guys had really started, the reason it became so popular in the scene, or is it because of the production? Because I've watched, I remember we talked about
All
this
three.
before, a couple of bands, can I say John Butcher Axes?
Yeah.
Someone like that I heard the demos during the 70s, and they were amazing. And then I heard the record, and I said, "What? They sucked the life out of it." So was it that kind of a case, or was it because you guys had? Or was it a combination?
It was a combination. A lot of the Boston bands will tell stories of the fact that we had this and we had that, but their records don't show that. Their records are very slick. They're of the day and stuff, and of the time period, and that's the Nervous Heaters, for example. Willie Loco, for example. It's not the way they sounded, but it's the way they were recorded with us and Flo and Eddie and stuff. And it's not to blame them because they're two very nice guys and stuff, but it wasn't the right chemistry, timing. We were in the middle of a blizzard. We were eating candy bars for 3 days. The drummer broke his arm, and on the last song, it cracked. You can hear it crack on the record. It was a difficult time. I think they may disagree, but I think one of the only bands that actually sounded good, the first record for the Real Kids, was great. That sounded more like them than any of the other bands.
What was that record?
It was on Red Star label, and it was just called The Real Kids.
Are there any songs? Because you probably play some in the break, but are there any songs that you liked that came off that album, the first album? The way that it sounded. No, your own album.
Our own, yeah. I liked Cinderella a lot. liked Mighty Idy a lot. I liked Don't Jump Me Mother a lot. We had DMZ played this cruise. Somebody set up a cruise for us in Portland, Maine, the Casco Bay boat line or whatever, and we're playing the cruise, and some guys are getting drunk and they want to beat up Jeff or something, and we try to stand in the way and make sure.
Why do they want to beat up Jeff? Because he's a pain.
Maybe.
Was he possibly being a pain? The way you described him, I could see that potentially being an issue.
At times, but when you're in a band, you're a target.
Yeah. Okay.
That's just the way it is.
Yep.
Guys in the audience will think he's looking at my girlfriend, blah blah blah, and that shit just happens. It happens. And that night, it happened to be Jeff that was on the hot spot. There were times that it was Peter or me.
Okay.
And but that night, they and we were doing what we could. Nobody gets to beat up our singer except us. And it was that type of thing. And so the song that came out of that night was "Don't Jump Me, Mother," and it was all about being on a boat and feeling the waves rocking, and or you're going under. Understand? And that one on the album came out pretty good.
But so if we go back to the demo, what on the demo would you, if people were just looking for definitive stuff at that time, because it's your first, early on?
The actual demo that we did at Intermedia Sound was Teenage Head.
Yeah.
And Jeff's first original with us. First time is the best time. And we did Teenage Head for a long time, actually. That's kind of the way we sounded.
That's if you wanted the definitive sound of you guys at that point in time, that would be it.
That and the Bomp EP.
The Bomp EP, yeah.
EP was just, as we were hot then. We were on tour a lot. We were playing with the Ramones. We were doing high profile gigs. We were playing constantly. And at the time we recorded the Bomp EP, we were in our prime. We were in a really good groove. And the guy understood our type of music. And that came the closest to what we sounded like on stage.
Now, what you think said that guy understood your kind of music. Now, did Flo and Eddie get to see you guys many times, or did they say
never?
They never. Oh, see, okay,
never saw us.
That explains a lot.
Yep. And the guy who did that EP had seen us, and he'd seen us in New York, and he had done early New York bands. Craig Leon is his name, and that was a really good fit. I wouldn't have minded him for the album, but it didn't work out that way.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm a young barracuda, down to
So once the album was released and we hated the cover, we hated the production. At that time, by that time, we were hating each other. And it just sort of dissolved in a whimper. And this was the end of 78 or so. And, you know, people weren't returning each other's calls, and that was it. And we moved on. I immediately started another band called Bad Habits, which evolved into a band called The Odds, who was together for 10, 12 years. Jeff started The Liars. Peter Greenberg went into Barrett's Whitfield.
Another band that I love.
Yeah, I love them. They're great.
And the Liars.
Yeah. So
You guys were a breeding ground for rock and roll.
it certainly was.
Try to find a way into society. There might be a way, mediocrity. I've traveled that road. Some others have tried, but while I'm laughing, I got it so much pride. But you and your friends will have pride when you say that I have got to fight. I ain't gonna be there when I make my mark. I ain't gonna be there in bed with fun and loving when I make my mark. But I'll make myself thankful with the people that will help me when I'm choosing the direction, when I'm making my connection in this world.
And it's amazing that, you know, we were getting fan mail back then, and we still get fan mail. There's still a very active audience for DMZ in Japan, in Brussels, in France, in Holland. They're nuts for it. We got together in the early 2000s and played a bunch of shows. We did LA and Las Vegas and Texas and New York, and these Japanese kids coming up to us in DMZ t-shirts that we'd never seen and posters that we'd never seen, and, you know, asking us to order, oh, Mr. JJ. And I was just amazed, and there's still an interest, and it's still very much alive. And yeah, it was a breeding ground for other bands in Boston, but that style led to many other bands, and that style is still sought after in other countries, and that blows my mind.
You're gonna wake up one morning, the sun beats you down. You're gonna wake up one morning as the sun breaks you down. You're gonna look around your myself, you're gonna find that I've gone. You didn't realize, you didn't realize, you didn't realize, you didn't realize, you didn't realize. Oh, you're gonna miss me, baby. Oh, you're gonna miss me, baby. Oh, you're gonna miss me, child. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll give you the warning. You never heeded it. How can you say you miss my loving when you never needed it?
You're gonna wake up wondering, find if I'm all alone. It was gonna stop me, baby. I'm not coming home. I'm not coming home. I'm not coming home.
Thanks for listening to Rat Tales, produced and directed by Lenny Scolletta and Mike Hoban. Special thanks to Medford Community Media. Opening theme composed by Tom Abbott and Lenny Scolletta and performed by the Wayouts.